The band is called Complete. It's a Ukrainian band from Ivano-Frankivsk, and I discovered it once when I made up this title. I thought it would be title of a book or a paper. Then I found out it was a title of an amazing song and good lyrics. In Bog We Trust is about narrative, is about facts, but trusting is based on experience. And as Marcin told, what I got from this, we trust because we know, and we choose the right cards because we get experience. And for millennia, we knew that wetlands were our place to live. So you could think that on such a conference, when I'm talking about such a specific thing as wetlands, bogs, it's a peculiar topic. I want to show that it is one of the most important issues on Earth. You may not know that we were created by a wetland god. This is the oldest written religion that we know. Second from right is God Enki. He created humanity in an autosexual act of digging canals in a mire. Mire's Al-Ahfar in Mesopotamia. You could imagine which part of his body he used to do this. Anyway, we are created from his semen and the mire. He was our father, the mire, the wetland is our mother. And by the way, the world was created by creating reed and making a floating island of reed on which humanity settled, the created humanity. This was the oldest civilization, settled civilization that we made. And well, before we were trying our best in Northern Africa, before climate change pushed us to northeast, and actually in North Africa, 40,000 years ago, we lived on wetlands. Yeah? As soon as we went down from the trees and stopped nomading, we settled next to lakes, riverside wetlands, and then we traveled until we found Nile and Tigris, Euphrates wetland valleys, and there we made this amazing civilization, which survived until recently. This is not the Palace of Babylon. This was probably much different, but this is amazing, and this collapsed only recently when Saddam Hussein decided to drain this area to modernize it, but also as a revenge for Arab uprising, people hiding there. And this is a story that is repeating from many sides of the world. Yeah, that wetlands were places where people lived in a harmony. This is a narrative, of course, with nature, but they benefited from nature, and this nature was a common good. And then they were conquered, they were governed by external power, by amelioration, by reclamation, drainage, and the civilization collapsed, and the environment that maintained it collapsed as well. And so during this song by Complete, I showed pictures from Europe. This is another part of the world. These are Mesopotamian wetlands now. Let's jump elsewhere. Amazing peatlands, actually, peat swamp forests of Southeast Asia. This is Borneo, where another human species is still living. This is one of our closest relatives. And orangutan, in Malaysian meaning forest man, is actually a bog man, because all tropical forests in Southeast Asia where orangutans live are actually peat swamp forests. They are wetlands, and well, you can see how fast the forest cover in Borneo shrinks. But the peat swamp forests shrink fastest. Yeah? We use them because we are attracted by this short time gain, not a long-term benefit, especially that it was not our human species. These are my photos, and you see this Indonesian peatland. This is Malaysia, actually. Peatlands burning each year on a massive scale, because once you drain a peatland in such a climate, they burn easily, not within plantations next by, because you cannot drain a piece just for the plantation. You drain mires in a kilometers extent, and then you leave this drained or dry forests which have no soil under the roots. Okay, there is many words. I will now go to my comfort zone of biology and ecology. Bogs, fens, swamps, mires, marshes, they are all wetlands. I use the name bog because this is the mostly used in a common language. Bogs and fens and most swamps are mires. I will tell what mires are. And mires are about half of world wetlands. World wetlands is about 6% of the continent's surface. And some of them look like this. These are from Poland. And they, of course, have amazing wildlife. And these species are all threatened. Turtle, the aquatic warbler, plenty of bird species on the migration or as nesting habitats, frogs and other amphibians, and humans as a species still attached to wetlands, but less and less. But I'm not going to talk about this type of connections, and I'm not going to talk about biodiversity today. I'm going to focus on the climate. And that's why I will talk about half of world wetlands, about mires, which are those wetlands that produce peat. You could say that mires is equivalent of peatlands, if not the fact that a lot of peatlands are drained, especially in Europe. And these are not mires anymore, because mires are wetlands. Peatlands are wetlands as long as we don't drain them. What makes peatlands peatlands is peat. Peat is a soil or a rock, some geologists would say, composed of dead remnants of living organisms, basically plants, but sometimes you find other organisms saved in peat. And the reason why they stay there is that in a mire soaked up with water, logged with water, you have very limited oxygen access. That is clear. Sometimes I ask students to explain it, and they say, well, because there is water. I am saying, well, but in a lake or river, you also have water, but you have oxygen for fish, so that then they can come up with the idea that it is not mixing. There is another a part of mixing reason why there is no oxygen in a bog. The reason is that bogs are made of organic matter that is very attractive to microbes for decomposing. Yeah? Any organic matter is quickly decomposed if you have enough moisture and oxygen, and you have all the microbes, fermentation, by the way. But because of the lack of mixing, this oxygen doesn't get down because it is immediately used by these microbes at the first centimeters. And then whatever is deeper can be saved, like this guy. There are various plants as peat builders, and we all know mainly about sphagnum, peat mosses, which indeed produce peat on the most of world peatlands, especially northern peatlands. But they are not the only peat builders. There are other bryophytes, other mosses, which are much more common in Central Europe, by the way, than bryophytes. There are sedges, very nice wetland grass-like plants, which make peat not with their leaves, but with their roots. And there are trees. These are our black alder, but there are also tropical trees which make peat on Borneo. And this peat can accumulate for millennia or longer if stable climate periods last longer, and can accumulate really meters or even tens of meters. The deepest deposits found still active peatlands are about 20 meters. In our biogeographic zone, they are mainly up to 10 meters because they formed after Holocene, 10,000 or 11,000 years ago. Peat accumulates on average 1 millimeter a year. It is a very slow process, but if it continues for millennia, it can withdraw from atmosphere a lot of carbon. Yeah? Because this peat are plants which assimilated CO2 from the atmosphere, and it is removed from cycling. To understand how potent peatlands are in removing carbon from atmosphere, we have to realize that black coal and brown coal as well, by the way, have been peat. Yeah? So the peatlands have done this job before, and they will do again. Yeah? If you look at this complicated graph, here you have time scale in millions of years, and you have two lines. This is the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, easy to reconstruct. Temperature, a little bit more difficult, but also geologists have methods. And if you look at the CO2, you see a steep drop here. And this period is called Carboniferous. Not for no reason, yeah. So there is a reason to call it Carboniferous, and the temperature follows. Yeah. This is when enormous peatlands were created within quite long periods of time, withdrawing from the atmosphere enormous amount of carbon, lowering the greenhouse gas effect on the Earth. There was an arrow. And the same is actually happening still, or has been happening in Holocene. Yeah, we have papers linking the initial cooling of climate during Holocene after the glaciation, linking this to massive development of peatlands, mires in the northern hemisphere especially. And there are complicated pictures showing this, showing the deglaciation period after glaciation, and then development of peatlands on the places in front of glacier. Yeah, the time scale is going this way. And then after peatlands have withdrawn a lot of CO2 from the atmosphere, glaciation can start again. And there is also some phase of methane emission from previous peatlands opened by the melting glacier. This is a bit too complicated to tell on the short run, but peatlands have a potent role to play in the global carbon cycles. And for me, the important message from this long-term role of peatlands is that even if we fail, and it is quite likely, then peatlands will do the job to fix the planet. Not only they, but they have an amazingly important role to do. This was the scale of millennia. If we look at peatlands on a shorter time scale, say hours or days, they are more or less, well, they're actually warming climate, if you look at hours, because they sink, they absorb some CO2, but they emit a little bit of carbon back as methane. Methane is more a potent gas, greenhouse gas than CO2. So it's warming. If you extend the time window in decades, you find that they are actually climate neutral, because this methane is oxidating in the atmosphere. Carbon stays in the bog, in the peat. So if you take the balance, they are carbon neutral, climate neutral. If you take a longer time window, and then how long depends on the type of a mire, then you find that they are actually climate coolers, because this carbon storing effect is prevailing over methane emission. And this is quite important to understand, that they will not do the job immediately. And the current carbon accumulation in peatlands is about 1% of our emissions. Yeah? And even if we fix the drained peatlands, they will not absorb our emissions. Yeah? There is no other way than stop burning fossil fuels. But in the climate context, a much more important message is the amount of carbon that has already been accumulated. Yeah? The carbon that is the stock within peatlands. It is most evidence show that it is about 500 gigatons, so a little bit less than currently in the atmosphere, twice more than in all forest biomass of the world. Forests cover 30% of continents, peatlands 3%. So the carbon density is amazing in these ecosystems. Yeah? This is 1/3 of soil organic carbon on 3% of the globe, which means that if we lose this carbon, we can pump to the atmosphere really a lot. If we keep it and prevent this escape, we can also do a lot. And to show, actually I used to show this slide to say that it is even more. And until recently we thought that it was half teraton. Now we know that it is 1 teraton. But soon the discussion started that the method of Nichols and Pettit was not correct, and there is no data showing that peatlands include 1 teraton. They include actually 500 gigatons. You know these discussions in science. But what is most interesting from this is that after this polemic, Nichols told, okay, let's check it with 2 methods. And they applied their new method and the inventory method, so what we already know. And they showed that both methods overlap in terms of confidence intervals. The average is actually different. Yeah? The average from the inventory method is about 500 gigatons, and from their new time history method based on peat sequestration rates and carbon density in peat is about twice larger. But if you look at confidence intervals, which is these black stripes, they overlap. So actually they tell the same. Average is just to keep our attention. What it also shows is how little we know about the biosphere. Yeah? If we cannot estimate the amount of carbon on 3% of land, and our uncertainty is so large. But at the same time, it shows that our trust in bogs is based on measuring confidence. Confidence is another word of trust, perhaps more scientific. So we know what we know, and we also know what we don't know. And yes, I thought not all peatlands are mires anymore. We have about 4 million hectares of the assumed peatland area. With area, it is easier. Yeah, we don't know how dense is the carbon there. About 80% is still in a natural state. So peatlands are actually, or mires are actually the last wilderness. These ecosystems, especially far north, has not been affected to a large extent, but these 80 million hectares that are degraded are causing a lot of trouble. I will take the rest of my lecture to talk about this trouble, but let's see why they are destroyed. 50% is agriculture. We've been talking about agriculture a lot today. 30% forestry, rest peat extraction, which now is also agriculture or horticulture, and some other more minor sources. And if we look where these emissions or this destruction has taken place, it already shows that it is about emissions. Perhaps this map should come as the next slide. It shows Southeast Asia and Central Europe, Central Northern Europe. Yeah? So these two parts of the world are responsible for how much? Yeah, maybe you know this, but you can make some guesses. Anyway, the message is that draining peatlands, we turn them from carbon sinks into potent carbon sources. Drained peatland is like a compost heap. Yeah? We store plants on a compost to let them degrade, decompose, and release nutrients so that we have fertile soil. At the same time, these plants release CO2 to the atmosphere, but we don't care, especially with the current narrative that it is biomass, so what has been accumulated last year can go to the year next year. But if we turn a peatland into a compost by bringing air to the peat, we are actually removing carbon that has been accumulating for hundreds or thousands of years on a rate that is at least 10 times faster than accumulation. Actually, in our region, it is about 20 times faster. In tropics, it is 50 times faster than accumulation. We actually, with draining, this is mean annual water level. This is zero water at the surface. If you are at this side, water level is below the surface. We are lowering methane emissions. So we should be happy because the potent greenhouse gas does not bubble up anymore, but we are increasing carbon dioxide emissions. But you remember that methane is about 30%, 30 times more strong as a greenhouse gas. But if you look at the scale, yeah, methane emissions from wet peatlands is measured in kilograms, and CO2 emissions is measured in tons. Yeah, so there is 3 orders of magnitude, or at least 2 orders of magnitude, larger impact of radiative forcing of drained peatlands than wet peatlands. So we like peatlands to be somewhere here, yeah, with reasonably low methane emissions and very low carbon CO2 emissions, or perhaps sink. So water at the surface or a little bit below. But we have unfortunately turned them, and we are still turning them into this. Okay, so the answer to the question is 2 gigatons a year, more or less. There are various estimates, 1.5, 2.5. So this is the average. 2 gigatons a year is about 5% of our emissions from burning fossil fuels. So again, this is not the main source, but this is easy to stop. Yeah, let's find 20 methods 20 ways to stop 5% of emissions, and we are done. Where does it come from? Drained peatlands used for oil palm plantations. Again, burning. You probably all know this graph, and perhaps some of you have been wondering what is this peak here. This is cumulative, CO2 emissions, not cumulative, but showing total CO2 emissions from 1880. Split between different sources. This is land use source, and this peak is 1997, when the largest peat fires in Indonesia happened just 1 year after drainage was complete. Yeah? So immediately it emitted about 20 to maybe 40% of the total anthropogenic emissions that year, or between 10 and 40. This uncertainty is quite large. But back to Europe and to Poland, actually, we are doing the same. Yeah, this is not only oil palm plantations, this is also dairy farming. Most of peatlands in Europe are used for, or drained peatlands in Europe are used for dairy farming. Such a grassland emits at least 20 tons per hectare per year. can be 30. So it is equivalent to driving your car for 200,000 kilometers a year from 1 hectare. 1 hectare. In Poland only we have 1,200,000 hectares of drained peatlands. In Europe we have 15 million, something like this. No? It's not only hay meadows, these are also pastures, but also plantations of carrots, for example, in Norway, of, no, not this way, potatoes, and many others. This is a cumulative graph showing how much more emissions from peatlands you have by adding next country, and Indonesia it's only makes about 40% of all greenhouse gas emissions from drained peatlands of the world. Poland is number 13, but if you take EU together, it is a good second. After Indonesia, you have European Union. On this graph by Hans Joosten from Greifswald Meyer Center, Poland was actually underestimated, in my opinion. I recently calculated by using simply the IPCC standard emission factors for types of drained peatlands and our assumed not very good knowledge about the area of the drained peatlands under various land use in Poland, and I got an estimate of 34 million tons, which is about 10% of our reported emissions from drained peatlands, from this 1,200,000 hectares. And this is more than all emissions that are reported from agriculture. Of course, officially they don't include it. How do they look? They look like this. So they are hay meadows. Some of this hay is used as fodder in Poland. Some of this hay is exported actually to Sweden. Sweden and Norway are exporting our hay. It's amazing that it makes sense, but it's food security. So Norway decided to be independent in terms of food supply, so they don't. So they would not buy milk, but they buy hay instead from Poland. But this is 100 euro per hectare. Yeah. So this is not an amazing gain. And this is to get milk or butter. If we calculate carbon footprint of this milk and include, we usually think about this, yeah, from cow rumination processes. So this is per 1 liter of milk, you have about 1/4 kilo of CO2 from cow rumination and extra 2 kilos from peat degradation. If you make cream of that, you have 50 kilos for 1 kilo of cream, and if you make butter, you have over 100 kilograms of CO2 emissions per 1 kilogram of butter. If you don't make it on a drained peatlands, you have 15. So it is quite a difference, and this is not as complicated calculations. I just looked at the efficiency of milk production on Polish grasslands average, and it is emission factors of 20 tons per hectare per year. A funny thing is that a lot of these peatlands in Poland are actually not used to feed cows, because this hay is not good anymore. Because if you drain a peatland, they degrade after 30, 40 years to such a state that it doesn't make sense. But many of them are mown still, because we pay farmers to mow, yeah, because they get subsidies. Sometimes they don't mow, and then we have this type of pictures, for example, nettles, because this peat releases a lot of nitrogen, so we have this type of ruderal nitrophilous vegetation. Sometimes these peatlands burn, and when peat burns, the release of CO2 along with smog is enormous. And this is not all. This is not all the picture of peatland degradation. This is another way. Remember this graph where 10% of peatlands were lost due to peat extraction. This is one site I visited in Canada, enormous peat extraction areas. But Canada used to be #1 exporter of raw peat, and now Latvia has replaced it. And if you include processed peat for horticultural substrate, this is still Germany. So this peatlands in greenhouses, and if you eat vegetables from supermarkets in Europe, you certainly get it with a high carbon footprint from peat. This peat is being used in this type of places, for example. So we have a problem, and to change this, we not only need to simply save peatlands, say they are protected, we need to change the systems of food production in the field and ex situ. If this is current emissions from drained peatlands, this is potential emissions from drained peatlands. There is still a lot to go. And there is a risk that these still pristine peatlands will be drained because there is a move of agriculture from south to north. Yeah? And peatlands are in the north, most of them. And with climate change, we observe that more and more agricultural pressure in Central Europe, Northern Europe, etc. So to play the role in the biosphere, peatlands must be wet. This is, there is no discussion about this. And they provide not only mitigation to climate change, which I talked about, but they also provide adaptation. And I will tell a little bit more about it now. So what should we do? First, of course, preserve what is still there. Yeah? Preserve virgin, intact mires. Upscale restoration. Restoration is, can mean rewilding, but can also mean restoring a function of the ecosystem. It doesn't have to be entirely natural, and it is not possible actually to get them back to their original state, but that comes later. The third thing, you may not have heard the word paludiculture. I will tell a few words what it is. Well, we have to change food production systems, get out of the peatlands with food production in most of the biogeographical zones. This is an example of pressure on peatlands. Am I talking too long?
Keep going.
This is actually not threatened by direct drainage. This is threatened by simply not acknowledging its role. They want to build a coal mine just under this peatland. This is a Ramsar site. This is a national park biosphere reserve in southeast of Poland. And it is obvious that the deep mine would affect the hydrological conditions and this mire would be gone. But this is just one of plenty examples I could show, and it's important to know that there is a campaign in Poland to protect Bagno Bubnów as part of Poleski National Park. But essentially WePlanet, from my perspective, largely means rewetting. And you may be surprised that actually the largest rewetting areas, maybe not now, because UK started to catch up, are located in Belarus. This is a privilege of central planning. Yeah? Lukashenko could tell, well, these excavated peatlands should be rewetted because we can earn carbon credits or on Kyoto Protocol from this, and they did. They were the first country to report it because they were convinced, actually by my friend Hans Joosten, who is a Dutch working in Germany on the University of Greifswald, who for some time played the role of official representative of Belarus in the climate convention, and he was often blamed for this. How can you work for a dictator? But he was pragmatic. If I have any means to save mires, and Belarus has very important mires, I will do this. So that's why they have really good achievements. But we have these examples everywhere, only the scale is still too small. Indonesia is now rewetting 2 million hectares. But yeah, this is quite difficult to achieve. These canals are enormous. The speed of water running is gigantic. This is a stone dam on a canal in Malaysia, on the Malaysian peninsula, and it is just between a plantation, oil palm plantation and a national park. Paludiculture. Paludiculture has been invented, well, simultaneously probably in Germany, Netherlands, Switzerland perhaps, and it has been the tradition of many sites. In Al-Ahfar in Iraq, they had paludiculture actually. They were using this reed under wet conditions. But the term was invented recently. And the idea is to re-wet peatlands, but if they are now in the agricultural sector, let them stay there. Yeah, we don't need we will not manage to get everything for rewilding and restoration, so we can produce wetland plants instead of dryland plants on wetlands, which is a stupid idea, but we never planted wetland plants, so we drained wetlands to keep planting cereals or mesic meadows, etc. Now let's benefit from wetland plants, and the story is that if you re-wet a drained peatland, you get all the nutrients that were accumulated there because of the peat decomposition. Actually more, because some of these nutrients became inaccessible after drainage. Phosphorus precipitates to iron and calcium, etc. If you re-wet, you suddenly have very high productivity. We don't love it for peatland restoration, because if you have high productivity, you will not get back these tiny plants or birds with short legs. But you can get this type of reed or cattail. And paludiculture is really innovation. If I had to choose a place where to get biofuels, plant for energy production, this is the only place. Because we have very high production, we don't have enormous biodiversity, but if we re-wet parts of these large peatlands, drained peatland systems, on the edges we save still the protected areas, and in the middle we can produce energy, we can use plants for materials like this. Tifa cattail is an amazing plant. Another source of financing really exploding now, so this is a good story, is carbon credits from peatlands, which means offsetting carbon emissions by companies who don't have to do this, yeah? Not those under Kyoto Protocol. It is all about the voluntary carbon credits. Companies are coming to NGOs and saying we want to offset our emissions to show the customers that we are carbon neutral, and please re-wet some peatlands for us. Germany is doing this with state certified system in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, in Schleswig-Holstein, and Bavaria, I think, or Brandenburg, I'm not sure. And other services, well, wetlands purify water, have no time to explain how they do this, and they retain water. This is interesting, so a short stop. On the global scale, wetlands, but wetlands excluding lakes and rivers, so basically peatlands and swamps, they contain 17,000 of cubic kilometers of water, which is the same as all soil moisture outside of peatlands. So again, a similar story as with carbon, and rivers, which we see this water in rivers contain 8 times less. And if you look at the atmosphere over lands, this is only 3, so it is 5 times less, or 6. Yeah? And this water in wetlands comes back to us. Yeah? If it evaporates, it creates fog, it creates rain, so it is not lost. It is important to understand that wetlands really mitigate local climates. Peatlands are cooler. This broken line is a temperature measured in a fen peatland. This is an upland, so it is a few degrees Celsius cooler. So this is one way how they cool down the atmosphere. They absorb heat, but they also absorb heat when water evaporates. Yeah, water evaporation is an endo-energetic process. So we cool our bodies by sweating. I think there is a air conditioning here. It works exactly the same way. So peatlands are such air conditioning mechanisms of the landscape. And if they are dry, they of course don't do this. If we re-wet them, we can get this moisture and this cooling in the cities. This is Bucharest, by the way. A failure of, what was his name? I forgot the name of the dictator of Romania, Ceausescu. Yes, he wanted to make a governmental district here and to drain it. He failed, fortunately, and this is a nice wetland nowadays, sometimes lacking water. So in general, coming to the end, we have a synergy of many benefits. Global climate, regional climate, clean water, a lot of water, restoring ties to nature. This is fairly important, and saving biodiversity. By the way, the species connected to freshwater wetlands are most threatened from all groups. And it is important, I have to acknowledge that restoration doesn't actually work well. There is a lot of papers, and recently a paper that included our group, our research, and Nature Communications. Rewetting does not return drained fen peatlands to their old selves. Yeah, they will not be the same in our lifetime as they were before. But perhaps they don't have to. If you destroy something and you repair, it may not function the same, but still you are able to restore a lot of the function, and especially CO2 emissions are cut immediately after you rewet. There is a methane peak a few years after rewetting, but if you have a longer term, you compensate for it. And another recent paper from Nature Communications shows that prompt rewetting of drained peatlands is the most effective way to cut emissions and to contribute with peatland management to combating climate change, despite methane. Yeah, concrete calculations, several scenarios: drain more, no change, so keep what is drained, rewet all now, rewet half now and rest later, and rewet all later after 2050. And well, if we rewet all now within the next 10 years, we lower the greenhouse gas effect of peatlands, so the radiative forcing by by 2/3, yeah, to 30% only. The question is whether we want it. This is not exactly about Myers. This is a study that we carried out about rivers, rewilding, remeandering, but it was also about rewetting. We asked people in Germany, Poland, and Denmark about their preferences. They were shown pictures of different riverside landscapes, including managed landscapes and wetland wilderness, typical rewetting peatlands, you know, with dead trees and a lot of reed, and they all voted for the wilderness. And the second was wetland agriculture. So we have support. It was enormous, actually, we were surprised. On the other hand, those who benefit on the short term from drainage, sorry. Yeah, this is a piece from a few days ago. Farmers in Ireland worry about EU rewetting law. So we need good narratives to convince them. But either way, peatlands will be wet. They must be wet, and they will manage. Yeah? If we don't make them wet, we will fail, and they will grow over our cities. These are peatlands of Campinos Forest. This is Warsaw. We want to rewet them. But if we fail, the city will be gone and the peatlands will come again. So this is my hope. Peatlands must be wet for nature, for people, forever. This is not my citation. This is Hans Jost, or not my phrase. And I started with a Ukrainian help. So I will finish with that. At the end, peatlands bogs will soak up pieces of our civilization, and if we can decide which one. Yeah, if those that we hate, it's okay. If those that we love, we are in trouble. But they will come back. Thank you.